Posterity. You will never know how much it costs the present generation to preserve your freedom. I hope you make good use of it. If you do not, I shall repent in heaven that I ever took half the pains to preserve it.
Those are the words of John Adams, the second president, and the main subject of the second episode of the Dead Presidents podcast.
Welcome to episode 2 of the Dead Presidents podcast. I'm Stephen Lincoln Douglas.
I'm James J. Hamilton.
And we're back with another thrilling and intellectually stimulating episode.
Had a big inaugural episode. Now we have big shoes to fill to follow it up. It's like John Adams trying to replace George Washington.
Yep, unfortunately we're going from 6'2" to 5'6".
It's a big height drop off.
Yep. You'll have that.
Well, we got lots of exciting information about John Adams coming up. Many great sponsors on this episode. And we've also got the top 5 presidential adulterers.
Now that is a pretty exciting top 5. We're going from the biggest drinkers to the biggest ravishers.
Titillating.
Yes, it is titillating.
Let's dive right into the top 5.
Why don't we dive in to
the top 5 presidential adulterers.
Number 5.
FDR.
Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He's getting a little bit busy on the side. Married to Eleanor, his 5th cousin. He started having an affair with Lucy Mercer, who was Eleanor's social secretary.
The convenience.
Yep. 1918, FDR was coming back from visiting the front in Europe as Assistant Secretary to the Navy when Eleanor unpacked his bags and found love letters between him and Lucy Mercer. So FDR almost got divorced. Eleanor was on the verge of divorcing him. She didn't want her children to suffer the disgrace of a broken home. Went to FDR's mother, and she threatened to cut off his inheritance if he didn't break up the affair.
Tight mind. But there's one logical decision to make. And, got to try and move on.
Yeah. Preserved appearances, preserved his political career. That would have ruined his political career if he got divorced.
Sure.
But they stayed together for the children, for the career. But their marriage was never the same. They slept in separate beds. They probably didn't have any more sexual relationship with each other. But that didn't stop both of them from getting it elsewhere.
Some light at the end of the tunnel?
During the White House years, they were sleeping in separate bedrooms, but they both had their own side pieces living in the White House. Eleanor having an affair with another woman.
Awesome.
Lorena Hickok, who's a reporter who became her close friend.
Great forerunner for the LGBTQ community. Yeah. Respect.
Yeah, historians seem to tend towards believing that they did have a sexual relationship. Apparently, J. Edgar Hoover, the FBI director, may have maintained a file of incriminating evidence of the First Lady with another lady.
Was there audio files? They bugged?
I don't know.
J. Edgar Hoover was probably like wearing his dress and listening to
getting off
Eleanor and Lorena, As Hoover probably himself would have put it, like, listen out.
Yeah.
Hey, come here. I got this great recording.
FDR was keeping busy himself. Despite being crippled by polio, there was at least one part below the waist that was still working.
Yeah.
Because he found another secretary, Missy LeHand, who was his secretary. He had a long-term affair with her.
He just keeps ending up with attractive secretaries.
Coincidence?
I guess so.
I don't know. She was like his substitute wife, just living in the White House, doing the job Eleanor didn't care to do anymore.
Wow.
She died in 1944. Coincidentally, that was the same year Lucy Mercer's husband died, so FDR could pick back up with that
Okay, was
affair.
that coincidence?
Or
I
was
don't
it
know.
murder?
Lucy Mercer was with FDR when he died, but she was spirited away from the premises before Eleanor arrived.
Now, I don't know. There's something fishy about those deaths.
Hmm?
FDR had some pull. I don't know. That's fishy in my mind. I suspect murder most foul. Murder in the name of lust.
That's the dark side.
That's something else.
It's the dark side of the FDR presidency.
Yeah. Wild. And that brings us to
Number 4.
Donald Trump. Trump's first marriage to Ivana Trump imploded on the covers of New York's tabloids after he brazenly took his mistress, Marla Maples, on a family vacation in Aspen, along with his wife, and attempted to hide her away until she approached Ivana and said, "I'm Marla, and I love your husband. Do you?" A famous issue of the New York Post in 1990, while he was still married to Ivana, quoted Maples on the front page saying Trump was, quote, "the best sex I ever had." He divorced from Ivana in 1991 and was married to Maples from 93 to 97. I'm not sure why I gave her a slightly English accent. I don't know. He's a dumb American broad. In 98, he met Melania, and they were married in 2005. In 2006, she gave birth to their son Barron. Around that time, Trump was allegedly having a year-long affair with Playboy model Karen McDougal. Around the same time, he allegedly had an affair with the porn star Stormy Daniels. In her book, she describes Trump's penis as smaller than average, but not freakishly small. Quote, "He knows he has an unusual penis. It has a huge mushroom head, like a toadstool. I lay there, annoyed that I was getting fucked by a guy with Yeti pubes and a dick like the mushroom character in Mario Kart. It may have been the least impressive sex I've ever had, but clearly he didn't share that opinion." In October 2016, Trump's lawyer, Michael Cohen, allegedly paid Daniels $130,000 to sign a non-disclosure agreement about the affair. Wow.
A lot of alleged extramarital shenanigans going on.
Yeah, some real alleged stuff going on there. Moving on. It's time for Presidential Adulterer number 3.
Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton, he kept busy during his years as governor of Arkansas, but not with his wife.
With the voters?
I don't know, yeah. He had many supporters.
Yeah.
An Arkansas state trooper recalled an argument in which Hillary yelled at Bill, "I need to be fucked more than twice a year."
Ouch.
Bill was definitely getting it more often than that. A different Arkansas state trooper said that he was responsible for personally contacting hundreds of women to have sex with Clinton.
Wow.
In the 92 campaign, Jennifer Flowers said she had a 12-year affair with Clinton. He admitted under oath that he did have sex with her. 2 former Miss Arkansas winners claimed to have had sex with him. A lawyer named Dolly Kyle swore under oath that she had a decade-long affair with him.
Guy is keeping busy.
He likely had an affair with Susan McDougal, who was involved in the Whitewater scandal and spent time in prison for contempt for refusing to testify against him. Paula Jones sued him for sexual harassment, alleging that when he was governor and she was a state employee, he brought her up to his hotel room to meet him.
Oh, well, that must have been about the campaign, about
Yeah.
business.
He pulled his pants down and exposed himself and asked her to kiss it.
Oh, that kind of business.
She said he was saying it in a very disgusting way, just a horny-ass way that scared me to death.
Yikes.
As president, Clinton had sexual encounters with Monica Lewinsky, White House intern. These have been thoroughly documented by the Ken Starr report. We're going to go right to the source.
And just a brief disclaimer, this next part is going to get lewd. Just filthy. So, make sure the dog's outside.
According to Miss Lewinsky, she and the president kissed. She unbuttoned her jacket. Either she unhooked her bra or he lifted her bra up, and he touched her breasts with his hands and mouth. Miss Lewinsky testified.
He put his hand down my pants and stimulated me manually in the genital area.
While the president continued talking on the phone, Miss Lewinsky understood that the caller was a member of Congress or a senator. She performed oral sex on him. He finished his call and a moment later told Miss Lewinsky to stop. In her recollection,
I told him that I wanted to complete that. And he said that he needed to wait until he trusted me more.
There were many more encounters and blowjobs, and then he told her that it had to stop, then it started up again. On one occasion, according to Miss Lewinsky,
he focused on me pretty exclusively,
kissing her bare breasts and fondling her genitals. At one point, the president inserted a cigar into Miss Lewinsky's vagina, then put the cigar in his mouth and said,
"It tastes good."
Another encounter.
And I continued to perform oral sex, and then he pushed me away, kind of as he always did before he came. And then I stood up and I said, I care about you so much. I don't understand why you won't let me make you come. It's so important to me. And he didn't want me to get addicted to him. He didn't want to get addicted to me.
And then he said,
"I don't want to disappoint you."
And the president consented. For the first time, she performed oral sex through completion. When Miss Lewinsky next took her navy blue Gap dress from her closet to wear it, she noticed stains near one hip and on the chest. FBI laboratory tests revealed that the stains are the president's semen.
Busted.
That's it.
Boom, 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 boom. But that brings us to
Top 5 presidential adulterer.
Number 2.
Warren Gamaliel Harding.
Harding once said to reporters, quote, "It's a good thing I'm not a woman. I would always be pregnant. I can't say no." A biographer of First Lady Florence Harding, who was a cold, calculating shrew of a woman, accounted for 7 mistresses. He allegedly contracted gonorrhea from an Ohio prostitute. While he was courting his future wife, he allegedly knocked up her next-door neighbor, Susan McWilliams. He also allegedly impregnated another woman, Augusta Cole, and may have forced her to get an abortion and had her committed to a mental institution. Holy shit.
Covering the tracks.
While he was a senator, he banged campaign volunteer Nan Britton and impregnated her in the Senate office building. She gave birth to his daughter, and he allegedly sent her money while he was president. After his death, she spent years trying to get a piece of his estate and published a book called The President's Daughter. She claimed that he banged her in a White House closet and that Secret Service agents helped conceal the affair from the First Lady. The supposed love of Harding's life was not the First Lady, but Carrie Phillips, his friend's wife with whom he had a 15-year affair. 1,000 pages of their erotic correspondence was released by the Library of Congress, and thank God that it was, because this is so just unbelievably entertaining. Just look at a picture of Warren Harding. Picture that man, the President of the United States, as you hear the following. He nicknamed his penis Jerry and referred to her vagina as Seashell. Just a couple of highlights. Quote,
Jerry is standing up beside me while I write you. Wish I could take you to Mount Jerry. Wonderful spot. Jerry sends Christmas greetings. He would come, too, if I might. Would he be welcomed cordially? Honestly, I hurt with the insatiate longing until I feel that there will never be any relief until I bury my face on your billowing breasts. I want you. and I wanted to feast my eyes to intoxicate them in glorious breasts and matchless curves and exquisite shapeliness, and I wanted to fondle and feel of beauty and superbness
Oh, Warren! Oh, Warren!
when your body quivers with divine paroxysm and your soul hovers for flight with mine.
Crazy.
Wow.
Crazy shit. The First Lady wrote,
Most of the pain in this world is located in the hearts of women. Maybe women are forced into mute acceptance of disloyalty, faithlessness, and humiliation because this is, after all, a man's world.
It's certainly Warren's world.
He
He and Jerry got and took whatever they wanted.
he really did his own thing. And speaking of doing your own thing, let's get to the number one top 5 presidential adulterer.
John F. Kennedy.
And this is no secret.
Yep.
A man addicted to sex.
He said to an aide.
I guess I just can't help it. If I don't have sex every day, I get a headache.
He admitted to a U.S. ambassador.
I can't get to sleep unless I've had a lay.
JFK once said of his own father.
Dad told all the boys to get laid as often as possible.
JFK nicknamed his penis JJ.
Another presidential penis nickname.
After he underwent circumcision at age 21, he wrote to a friend that JJ has never been in better shape or doing better service. The New York Times wrote that JFK didn't have to lift a finger to attract women. They were drawn to him in battalions.
Battalions is a lot.
Yep. Well, when you're the president.
Yeah.
A White House staffer said there was a conspiracy of silence to protect his secrets from Jacqueline and to keep her from finding out. The newspapers would tell how the First Lady was off on another trip, but what they didn't report was how anxious the president sometimes was to see her go. After JFK would sip daiquiris and take naked swims with beautiful women, a cleanup crew swept in to remove any leftover jewelry, hairpins, or underwear. Jackie knew about the love affairs of her husband. She accepted them since she knew he would always come back to her. It was common among men of the elite to have extramarital affairs. Jackie's own father was a known womanizer. JFK would spend weekends at Frank Sinatra's place in Palm Springs. He frequented the Sands Hotel in Vegas and Peter Lawford's place in Santa Monica. Peter Lawford once said,
I'm not proud of this. All I will say is that I was Frank's pimp and Frank was Jack's. It sounds terrible now, but it was a lot of fun.
Indeed. JFK seduced a 19-year-old White House intern and took her virginity in the bed he shared with his wife. He skinny dipped in the White House pool with interns nicknamed Fiddle and Faddle. Once gave amyl nitrate to one of them who had a panic attack.
Okay, isn't that what, like, Dennis Hopper was doing in Blue Velvet?
Probably. Yeah, I think so, yeah. That's our president.
You're like me!
At one point, Jackie was giving a White House tour to a French journalist. When the intern passed them, she remarked, "This is the girl who supposedly is sleeping with my husband." Another time, JFK was with 2 women at the same time and smoked 3 joints. He declined a 4th joint, saying,
Suppose the Russians did something right now.
Gotta be on your toes. Ellen Romecht was an alleged high-class call girl and alleged East German spy who had alleged relations with high-ranking government officials, including JFK, with whom she dined at the White House on many occasions. She was investigated by the FBI, and Bobby Kennedy had her deported, allegedly to cover up the affair. Not only that, JFK banged Marlene Dietrich, who had had an affair with his father.
Holy shit.
She said that JFK was so quick she could barely remember it. JFK also banged Marilyn Monroe and told her,
You're not really First Lady material.
Less than 3 months before her death, a heavily intoxicated Monroe sang, "Happy birthday, Mr. President," and he joked,
I can now retire from politics after having had Happy Birthday sung to me in such a sweet, wholesome way.
sarcastic. As an adolescent, JFK contracted a case of urethritis that would flare up through the rest of his life. Before the Bay of Pigs invasion, he called a doctor to examine a, quote, burning sensation and occasional mucus when he peed.
Ouch.
That was our president.
That was our... Yeah, I mean...
I wonder how many of those numerous women he was with ended up with some urethritis of their own.
Yeah, it's hard to say.
That was the top 5 presidential adulterers. We've got a lot of... we're going to get into John Adams right after a word from our sponsors. The Dead Presidents Podcast is brought to you in part by Dr. Shead's Venereal Cure. Dr. Shead continues, as hitherto, to treat venereal complaints in every stage of that disagreeable disease without the use of mercury or restriction to a particular diet.
That's handy.
Proof having already established the reputation of his treating complaints of the above description, it is unnecessary to add more than that a cure is perfected with speed, ease, and safety to the constitution of the patient. Seminal weakness in either sex, if not too far advanced in years, perfectly cured by the use of his medicine for a few weeks only, the most rigid secrecy observed. Please apply at Dr. Shead's house at the corner of Pine and 6th Streets. Listeners, are you sick of doctors treating your VD with mercury and dietary restrictions?
No.
Not anymore. Now there's Dr. Shead's Venereal Cure. And the best part? With rigid secrecy observed, you don't have to worry about Dr. Shead blabbing to your friends and neighbors. Try his Venereal Cure today.
President Kennedy should have used some of that.
Definitely.
And now a very important message. French boy wanted. A single gentleman wishes to employ a French lad from 12 to 16 years of age as a body servant. The lad will be treated with liberality and kindness. To our listeners out there, if you're a French boy between 12 and 16, hit us up on Twitter at DeadPrez Podcast. That's Prez with a Z. And we can hook you up with a job as a body servant to our newest sponsor, who has asked that we don't say his name on the air. This is 100% legitimate, totally above board. What young French boy wouldn't want a job serving the body of a single gentleman? You will be treated with liberality and kindness. That's a Dead Presidents Podcast guarantee. We thoroughly vet our sponsors and don't let just anyone advertise for young boys on our show.
You can be sure of that. Now an important message from our sponsor, Jacob Burt. Whereas Phoebe, my wife, hath eloped from my bed and board, and hath behaved lasciviously, this notice is to forbid all persons harboring or trusting her on my account, as I will pay no debt of her contracting after this date. You heard that, listeners. Jacob Burt's wife Phoebe has left him, and has wantonly engaged in lascivious behavior with another man.
Disgusting.
So don't expect her husband to pay any more debts of her contracting. If you lend money to the voluptuous libertine Phoebe Burt, do so at your own risk. That's a word from our sponsor, Jacob Burt. Hit us up on Twitter at Dead Prez Podcast, where you can find out more about our sponsors and see their original ads published in newspapers during John Adams' presidency. Well, we're so proud of all our sponsors.
Indeed we are.
Here at the Dead Presidents Podcast. Why don't we just going to take a minute to maybe pull back the veil on our advertisers for a second? Yeah. All of our sponsors are actual advertisements from newspapers.
Legitimate, 100%
of
real.
The period. And if you recall from our inaugural episode, our sponsor Thomas Miller warning listeners about his infamous wife,
Rosanna
Miller. And also we just brought you Jacob Burt, who's having problems with his wife Phoebe.
Yeah.
That's a very interesting genre of advertising we found in early American newspapers.
And I'm glad you brought up the Millers, because I recently discovered, and I meant to say this as an update when the time was right, and it seems that it has, but actually Toto wrote the song Rosanna in reference to Rosanna Miller. So just a little Interesting tidbit, a little factoid.
So infidelity reverberates through history.
That's true.
This is kind of the double-edged sword of the patriarchy that we've found. Because at the time, women really didn't have rights. They were kind of under the complete control of their husbands. But husbands also had the responsibility to financially care for their wives. And a husband, if a wife abandons her husband, the husband can cut off his obligation to support her financially, but he has to advertise that in the newspaper so that the public is aware to not lend her money on his account.
A great shame to both sides. He's putting out the word that she's a dirty trollop, but at the same time, he's saying, my wife cheated on me.
Yep. A man is forced to publish his cuckoldry.
Yes.
In a form of advertising that we have dubbed cuckvertising. And a lot of our sponsors on this episode and future episodes are going to be of this variety, so we want the listeners to be aware of what this stuff is.
That's it.
I think
This is all real.
They say that everyone dies twice. When your body dies, and then you die again when the last time anyone mentions your name. And I'll bet, old Jacob Burt had been dead for going on 200 years until we resurrected his name and his most acute moment of shame in his life when he had to tell everyone about the lascivious conduct of his wife, Phoebe.
When the average human being wonders, what am I going to be remembered for? What is my legacy? Well, Jacob Burt's legacy was we dug up his name way down the road just to point out his shame.
He lives on through the Dead Presidents podcast.
That's right.
And that brings us to John Adams.
The subject of our second episode and our second president of the United States.
We don't have to worry about any adulterous cuckoldry going on in the Adams household.
Certainly no ill behavior on this man's account.
Among all presidents, probably least likely to be on the adulterers list.
Correct.
He comes from puritanical Massachusetts.
Little place called Braintree.
Born 1735, just outside of Boston.
And Braintree is a fitting name for the place, considering later it is renamed after the Adamses and is christened Quincy. But Braintree is a little bit ironic given the intelligence of the Adams family.
Their big brains
some of them
fall far from the tree.
Shit, I should have reworded that because I forgot about all the ones that died druggies.
The Adams family. Yeah, some of them died. I think John Adams and John Quincy Adams had some of their sons fall into the perils of alcoholism.
They both did.
In the classic, Franklin Pierce-esque manner of the inaugural episode's top 5 drunkest
downward
presidents.
Spiral.
But not John Adams. He was descended from Pilgrims and other early English settlers of Massachusetts, the salt of the earth. Father John Adams Sr. was a farmer, leather craftsman, constable, church deacon. Adams called his father the honestest man I ever knew.
And that is pretty cool. There is a story of John Adams as a youth saying to his father that he wanted to become a farmer. He made up his mind he wanted to be a farmer. And so his father said, okay, I'll show you what it's like to be a farmer. And he took him out and made him do all of the grunt work, shoveling shit and getting filthy and dirty. And at the end of the day, his father was like, so you still want to be a farmer? How did you like it? And Adams responded, I enjoyed it very much, sir. Which was an inkling to his stubborn attitude that would further and further develop.
An early instance of the famous Adams stubbornness. Perhaps instances like that are what caused Adams to take up smoking at the age of 8 years old.
Starting it off early. And we're talking about a guy who lived to be 90 years old, so he smoked 82 years. Consecutively. Did not succumb to cigarette-related ailment. I mean, maybe it contributed.
Not a good advertisement for the no smoking crowd.
Nope.
Adams instead probably could have had his own brand.
Yeah.
Did commercials about how cigarettes don't hurt you.
Look at me.
On 82 years.
Yeah.
Well, despite Adams' protestations that he stubbornly wanted to be a farmer, he ended up going to Harvard in 1751, received the classical education. His parents wanted him to become a minister. Instead, he became a lawyer.
Not a bad decision when faced with the two, I wouldn't think.
Ended up serving him well in his future career. But getting a career up and running was an impediment to his ability to get with the ladies in a more legitimate sphere.
That's true.
He's not one for the tawdry and extramarital affairs of some other presidents.
No, he's not. He enjoyed the company of ladies, but he would remain celibate until marriage. His dad basically said that any illicit sex before marriage automatically results in venereal disease, and we're talking before...
That's before Dr. Shead's venereal cure.
He's not around.
Nope.
They can't help him at that
Pre
point.
Dr. Shead days.
You had to watch yourself.
You got to keep it in your pants.
That's it.
That's what John Adams did.
And he certainly did. And he wrote in his autobiography,
"No virgin or matron ever had cause to blush at the sight of me, or to regret her acquaintance with me. No father, brother, son, or friend ever had cause or grief for resentment for any intercourse between me and any daughter, sister, mother, or any relation of the female sex. My children may be assured that no illegitimate brother or sister exists or ever existed."
John Adams almost became engaged at age 23 to Hannah Quincy, but he held off because he wanted to establish himself in his career first and not get married too early. He waited until he was 28 years old.
yeah, he was a sound... He was sound. I mean,
He was
that's
established,
reasonable. That's a good mindset.
and he's ready to marry Reverend's daughter, Abigail Smith, who was the ripe young age of 19. She lacked formal education, but she was very well read. In poetry, philosophy, politics, she was one of the most erudite and intelligent women to serve as First Lady.
She indeed was. She kind of, in a sense, brings to mind for me Sarah Polk, who we'll talk about later on, in terms of most trusted advisor to her husband, really. John Adams could talk to Abigail about anything and did. And she had really intelligent and good insight. And Sarah Polk was the same way, and we'll get to that later on. So I would put her as top-tier First Lady material, unlike Marilyn Monroe.
No. Yeah, the influence that Abigail had is shown throughout their, lifetime correspondence.
Which is, if you get the chance, just phenomenal reading. And also throw in the stuff that they had with Jefferson, too, because they both wrote to him. The letters between John and Abigail are one thing, but there's like a triumvirate of letters between the three of them that are fantastic reading as well.
Very prolific letter writers. In 1776, Abigail wrote to John Adams in favor of women's rights. She said, "Remember the ladies, and be more generous and favorable to them than your ancestors. Do not put such unlimited power into the hands of the husbands. Remember, all men would be tyrants if they could. If particular attention is not paid to the ladies, we are determined to foment a rebellion, and will not hold ourselves bound by any laws in which we have no voice or representation."
Amen and mad respect, my sister. Awesome stuff. Yeah. You want to talk about a forerunner for women's rights? You need look no further.
She was a tough gal, Abigail Adams.
Incredible.
Stood equal to her very stubborn husband.
And
who
she had a lot of respect at the time when women were seen as basically just, subservient. So, let's move on over to personality. What was John Adams like as a guy? Who was this dude? What was he like?
In his intimate family settings, he was a very warm, generous, and loving man, but outsiders could see him as cold, aloof, and conceited. He was pugnacious, temperamental, and prone to mood swings. Suffered fits of depression throughout his life.
It's a shame. And some of that could be genetic. His mother was known to have a pretty rough temper. So there could be a little bit of that. But
John Quincy Adams also had the depression as well.
Right. Yeah, there's something in the lineage there that kind of plagued him a little bit.
Yeah.
But they combated it well, some of them. Mm-hmm. As I mentioned before, like, some of them did not fare well. The Adams family, was creepy and kooky to a certain extent.
Yeah.
But,
well, John Adams and John Quincy Adams kept diaries and we're able to see their inmost struggles that a lot of people didn't keep records of it.
Yeah, and we're not talking just like any diary. We're talking like a day-by-day record of decades on both parts that go so far as to mention like what the weather was like that day, and just it's fascinating. You could really put yourself into their world, and it's important for people today to kind of maybe take a step back and consider doing that. So that brings us to John Adams in his pre-presidential career, which was illustrious.
Very distinguished. Really started to take off in 1770 when the Boston Massacre occurred. British soldiers fired on a mob in Boston, killed a few people.
Come on then, how about you? Just picture that kind of thing going on, straight out of Monty Python.
The soldiers were charged with murder, and no colonial lawyer would take the case defending them except John Adams.
Which is, now, we just got to take a step back and try and put into words, if we can, how crazy this is. Okay, there's problems with England.
John Adams.
Some British soldiers have killed innocent people, and nobody wants to take their case. John Adams is a lawyer, and he puts his civic duty as a lawyer above his own personal feelings.
He supports the colonist protests, but he also believes in the right to a fair trial and a fair defense, and he thinks that these soldiers are being...
They're being deprived of something that they should be entitled to as a basic right, and so he's gonna step up to the plate.
They're about to be steamrolled in the trial, but he wants to make sure that the facts come out.
Everybody deserves a fair trial.
And he shows that the soldiers were provoked and were being pelted with snowballs and rocks, and the crowd was shouting at them, daring them to fire, and that they fired mostly in self-defense. And John Adams ended up getting them acquitted, and a couple were found guilty of manslaughter, a much lesser offense than murder. So he basically got them off the hook in the face of
almost total adversity, really. I mean, so that has to say something about his quality as a lawyer. Like, he must have been one bad-ass lawyer.
Yeah, and he didn't care that this made him unpopular. It made him unpopular at first, but it ended up helping him once he is diving into the colonist cause. They can say, hey, look at this guy. He defended the British.
That's right.
That gives him a lot of credibility to criticize the British.
Yeah, so that gave him, like, John Adams, like, probably otherwise would have been totally overlooked in all of these maneuverings. But I think because of that incident alone, he made a name for himself that, there was good and bad to it, but he was the one person that, okay, we could maybe use this fella.
Yeah, he has the reputation as being fair and also being, I guess, persuasive if he won that case.
Right.
To then go make Massachusetts' case in the Continental Congress, where he gets elected as a delegate.
And now, we're in the Continental Congress. We need to broaden this potential revolution. So how are we going to get that done?
Well, we have mostly the New England states
That doesn't help us.
fighting
We need to get help from the South. Now, who in the South is important enough, is imposing enough, is illustrious enough to bind the South to the cause?
Probably somebody from Virginia.
Probably somebody by the name of the first subject of our podcast, George Washington.
Yep. John Adams nominated Washington to be the commander of the Continental Army,
A wise choice.
binding Virginia to the revolutionary cause.
And making it something that could actually proceed.
Yep. Now all 13 colonies are on board.
And of course, we talked about this in the last episode. Would Washington have come forth on his own and say, "I'll do it"? I don't know. Was it in his character to just do that, or did it take John Adams saying, "Hey, this guy"?
Yeah, it was pretty much against the kind of general character at the time for a guy to stand up and ask for an office.
All right, I'll do it.
Supposed to be disinterested and be drafted into the role.
So let's not understate the importance of the fact that John Adams was like, "Hey, we need this guy."
Yeah.
And obviously that worked out pretty good.
Yep. John Adams led the charge in the Continental Congress to declare independence. He served on the committee that drafted the Declaration alongside with Jefferson and Franklin. And they put Jefferson in charge of the actual writing, again, because he was a Virginian.
And as Adams himself put it, a better writer.
Yeah. One of the few instances of humility in John Adams' career.
That's it.
He gives over to Jefferson to draft the Declaration. Adams was too busy serving on lots of other committees, and he thought it was more important he was going to be in the forefront arguing to have the Congress actually vote for independence.
That's just it, yeah. Adams was a little bit more pragmatic in that sense. Jefferson was bothered that they wanted to change anything to what he had come up with originally. He looked at it probably more as this is going to be a lasting document of supreme importance. And Adams was like, okay, yeah, we just need to get it out there, but it's more important that we ensure that we have the support to do this, Not that Jefferson didn't think that, but I think at the same time he was looking at this as like, hey, this is something.
Yeah, for some people the actual text of the Declaration would be more of an afterthought, kind of just a summary of everything we've been saying for years. Jefferson approached it and made it sound, he put it to immortal words that made him famous.
Right. That's going to bring us to some more diplomatic service between 1778 and 1788.
Yeah,
There's a full decade where John Adams ain't going to be around too much.
Not in America. He's become one of the top diplomats of the country. Goes over at first to join Ben Franklin and Arthur Lee as the diplomatic commission to France.
This was uncomfortable for him.
We're trying to get France to be our ally. And John Adams goes over there. Ben Franklin is already a rock star in France. He's a famous scientist. He's got his key, his kite, his electricity. He's a big deal.
And he had some of that, as the French would put it, électricité sexuelle, I think is what they...
Joie de vie.
Yeah, that too.
Adams was a little jealous. Franklin was part and parcel on board with the French penchant for sexual licentiousness. Adams puritanically disapproved.
Yeah, he came across as a bit of a prude, whereas Franklin would be more like the let's eat and fuck type.
Yeah. So Adams didn't get a lot done during his first stint in France. He came back to the United States in time to help draft the Constitution of Massachusetts.
That he probably really held dear to him.
Yeah, he
that
really
probably
relished
held
that.
a lot to him.
I think that was an early example of the distinct three branches of government with
Right.
separation of powers that was influential in the U.S. Constitution.
Very important.
1780, Adams was sent back to Europe to become minister to the Netherlands, where he obtained Dutch recognition of American independence and negotiated some important foreign loans.
And this was huge because we had virtually no credit whatsoever. Like, financially, we were kind of shambolic.
Yep,
Well, not kind of.
totally shambolic.
We were totally shambolic, and
Massive inflation.
yeah, it was bad.
Paper became practically worthless at different points.
And John Adams was able to get us hooked up, get us a line of credit, yo.
Getting the stamp of approval from the European banking class made us like a real thing.
That's it. So we were legitimized. And what did he get as a reward? A fever that left him in a coma for like 5 days, and he almost died.
Yeah, he was pretty messed up.
It was some kind of Dutch fever. He called it the Dutch complaint.
It was pretty bad. It was touch and go there for a minute.
Yeah, for sure. We could have, we talked about fate with Washington. Well, here it is, rearing its head with John Adams.
In 1783, he joined Franklin and John Jay to negotiate the Treaty of Paris, which ended the war, secured British recognition of American independence.
So there it is.
Then Adams
We've won.
was honored by being named minister to Britain.
Which is, again, another huge, huge deal. And, you know, we don't want to understate the importance of our subjects. Everybody has something to offer. And, you know, there's going to be certain presidents that, you know, there's going to be things that pop up that it's like, oh, wow, I didn't know that about this guy. Or I didn't give him the proper, you know, time of day, if you will. And John Adams becoming the first minister to Great Britain as a new nation is pretty crazy. This upstart colony, now calling itself a nation of its own, is sending somebody over as a minister, an official minister, to meet with King George III himself.
Yeah.
And that man is none other than John Adams.
Yeah, he's the first one to stand in front of King George as an independent representative of an independent nation, not just some rebel.
And lo and behold, he impresses him, which is really saying something, because King George III at this point, and as years go by, he's getting out there. He's starting to lose it a little bit. But Adams impressed him, and that was super important for the beginning of our little nation.
Yeah, because now...
Because what if we went over there and pissed him off? Immediately. And he decided, oh, bugger this thing. Have a joke, you know. And decided, you know what, actually, no. We're going to fuck you up.
Yep.
It took the right kind of person to go over there and be the first minister to Great Britain. And John Adams was the right kind of person. And that pretty much is what leads us to his next important role.
Yeah, because he was over there during the Constitutional Convention. We adopt the Constitution. George Washington is the consensus, obvious choice for president. But we need a northerner to balance the ticket and be vice president. And who is that going to be? There's nobody more distinguished than John Adams.
That's right. And so, John Adams is elected the first vice president of the United States.
He launches that office into existence, becomes the first vice president to not be entirely thrilled with the vice presidency.
Yeah.
Washington,
Not the last, but the first.
Yep, Washington didn't consult his opinion regularly. He didn't include the vice president in cabinet meetings.
Ouch.
John Adams.
Yeah, he has a pretty good quote about it. My country has in its wisdom contrived for me the most insignificant office that ever the invention of man contrived or his imagination received.
So yeah, he doesn't like it. He's not too thrilled about this.
Not a fun job.
He doesn't get to give his opinion, and he's not asked his opinion. And he's an opinionated man.
Yeah. He presides over the Senate. Like nowadays, the vice president doesn't actually sit through Senate proceedings, but John Adams did. He had to sit there all day, and he wasn't really allowed to talk. He just
That would suck for somebody like him.
Listen to other people. He found that very frustrating. He became bogged down in formalities. When the Senate debated what different titles people should be called by, John Adams thought that the president should be called His Highness, the President of the United States and Protector of their Liberties.
A very regal choice.
Yeah. Other people
didn't go over well.
Didn't appreciate the regality of it and ridiculed Adams.
With a sick burn.
Referred to him as His Rotundity, the Duke of Braintree.
Ouch. Bringing the man's weight into it. Have you no class, sir?
So he's got legislators snickering behind his back. But he puts in his time.
He puts in his time. He puts in 8 years.
He sticks it out for 8 years.
And Washington decides, I've had it.
He's skipping out on a third term.
Peace. I'm hitting the dusty trail, yo. And in God's name, who could take Washington's place? Well, there's only one really logical option here.
For the Federalist Party, who are they going to turn to?
None other than our man J.A.
John Adams.
But there's another man, T.J., that kind of thinks maybe,
Thomas Jefferson, he'd been Secretary of State, but he resigned from the Washington administration because he didn't like the direction it was heading in. Washington becoming increasingly more federalist in that he is siding with Alexander Hamilton, his fiscal policies, his strengthening of the federal government. The Jeffersonians don't like and have kind of starting up their informal opposition party. At this time, there were no formal parties. There were no formal nominations for president. But this is the first time we're going to have an actual contest for a presidential election.
That's right. So it's important nonetheless. You're not going to have your, debates, and you're not going to have your slogans and your ads and all that jazz. But, yeah. For the first time, it's like, hey, we have a choice in this.
Yep. It's not just the uncontested George Washington election anymore. People are going to actually choose between two increasingly divergent philosophies of how the government's going to go. But at this time, the Jeffersonian Republican Party is still not as well organized as it would be. And I've read that Jefferson kind of privately almost hoped that he was going to lose because he thought the next 4 years were going to be a sticky situation and didn't mind having John Adams be stuck with dealing with it.
But Jefferson wasn't exactly out of the water because the way things worked, Jefferson becomes the vice president.
Yeah, at the time there was no formal separation between presidential and vice presidential candidates. The electors of the Electoral College would vote for two people, not distinguishing between them, and the guy with the most votes would be president, the guy with the second most would be vice president. And so that leaves the opposition party guy Jefferson as vice president. And that was because the Federalist Party did not maintain party solidarity on their de facto running mate, who was Thomas Pinckney of South Carolina. Alexander Hamilton didn't really like John Adams, didn't want him to become president, and tried to kind of scheme to have Thomas Pinckney get over on Adams by thinking that if maybe some of the Southern delegates would split their votes between Pinckney and Jefferson and drop Adams off, that Pinckney might finish ahead of Adams. But Adams supporters in the North found out about this and dropped their support for Pinckney altogether, which put Jefferson in the number 2 spot and also caused Adams to hate Hamilton, and that would have drastic consequences.
They had some beefs before, little ones, but this was... I think that drew the line in the sand. That was the straw that broke the camel's back with their relationship.
Very consequential effects for John Adams' presidency, which we will be diving into right after this word from our sponsors.
We'll be back. The Dead Presidents Podcast is brought to you in part by Dr. Hooper's Female Pills, one of the best medicines hitherto discovered for complaints incident to the female sex. Price, $0.25. You heard that, ladies. Why suffer from complaints incident to your sex when you could just take Dr. Hooper's Female Pills? For just $0.25, you can't afford not to.
We're proud to be sponsored by Thomas Gisborne, who has just published a book that is available for only $1. It's called An Inquiry into the Duties of the Female Sex.
Wow, sounds like an interesting read.
Ladies, are you a little fuzzy on the duties of your sex? This man has all the answers. He covers such subjects as female education, the mode of introducing young women into general society, dress, amusements, excess in the pursuit of amusements, considerations antecedent to marriage, duties of matrimonial life, and parental duties. Listeners, if there's a young lady in your life, you better drop $1 on this book before you even think about introducing her into general society. Without Thomas Gisborne, she might not know how to dress, might not know her matrimonial duties, and might even fall to excess in the pursuit of amusements.
Wouldn't want that.
You won't have to worry about any of that if you pick up your copy of Duties of the Female Sex today.
I wonder what Abigail Adams would think about Thomas Gisborne's text. Anyway, that brings us to an important message from our sponsor, Hezekiah Eldridge. Whereas Hannah, the woman that was formerly called my wife, has eloped from my bed and board 4 or 5 times, whoever will take up and return said Hannah shall have 6 reward. I forbid all persons harboring or trusting her on my account. There you have it, listeners. Hannah Eldridge has left her husband so many times that he literally can't even keep track anymore. Is it 4? 5? Who knows? We do know that if you can grab a hold of Hannah and drag her back to Hezekiah's bed and board, there's a 6 reward in it for you.
Nice.
You can decide whether that's more valuable than any X-rated rewards Hannah might offer you to let her go.
Ooh.
Be on the lookout for the notorious Hannah Eldridge. A message from our sponsor, Hezekiah Eldridge. And we're back. And it's time to dive headfirst into the presidency of our second president, John Adams. Now, my God, what kind of mindset would John Adams be in? He has to follow up 8 years of George Washington.
Yep. He's got a big problem. He's not George Washington.
That's it. That's the biggest problem. And as we spoke before the break, this was a contested election. Adams wasn't unanimously chosen. He didn't get that Washington treatment.
No, he won 71 electoral votes to 68. He really just squeaked in there.
Yeah. So, I mean, it wasn't just contested. It was ludicrously close.
Yeah, and he's kind of, in large part, he's riding on... He's the successor to George Washington as the Federalist Party.
Kind of the heir apparent to the
He's
Federalist
the
ticket.
candidate of continuity with the Washington administration, which leads to one of his first and most fateful decisions as president. He keeps George Washington's cabinet in place and doesn't replace them with his own people.
Doesn't replace anybody. That was probably in his best interest.
Yeah, he didn't want to look like he was...
It's hard to say what he would have thought about it.
Yeah, he didn't want to look like he's repudiating Washington's administration. And he wants to keep continuity. But part of the issue is this isn't the all-star cabinet of the beginning of Washington's term.
No, it's not. We got. There's been some shuffling since the all-star dream team.
This is the kind of somewhat second-rate cabinet of the end of Washington's presidency after the top guys had resigned. And
Not
Washington,
quite as good, but
Washington
as a
had
matter
trouble,
of solidarity, Adams decides to keep him.
Washington had trouble getting the people he wanted to serve in the cabinet towards the end, and these are the guys who were willing to serve.
Yeah, because as we mentioned in the previous episode, it wasn't all roses and tea in the garden.
Secretary of State was Timothy Pickering. Treasury was Oliver Wolcott. Secretary of War was James McHenry. One thing these guys all had in common is they were big Alexander Hamilton supporters. And Adams would eventually accuse them of being puppets more loyal to Hamilton than to him, and complain that Hamilton was shadow running his government.
Yeah. So there was a legitimate beef there. Hamilton was strong-arming a little bit.
Yeah, he did, and that would really come to a head later in Adams' presidency.
Yeah.
Adams also...
Yeah, while we're on to the cabinet, should we just bring up the fact that what it boils into as a result of that feud?
Sure.
Adams forces everybody to resign.
Yeah, he ends up forcing their resignations. I think Pickering refused to resign and was fired.
Yeah, so
he was the first cabinet member to be fired. But that wasn't till... He didn't do that till his last year in office. He spent almost his whole presidency with this cabinet. And he went through a lot of stuff. When he took office, relations with France were deteriorating. France and Britain are at war. The United States has signed the Jay Treaty with Britain.
Right.
That's supposed to be a treaty to respect our neutrality, but France kind of sees it as us siding with Britain over France.
Yep, we talked about this a little bit before. It's not a pretty picture. We're straddling the line. We're trying to appease everybody, but pleasing nobody.
Yep. And Britain is considered, or rather the Federalist Party is considered to be the one that favors Britain, whereas the Jeffersonian Republican Party favors France more. So this Britain-France issue is also a very intensely partisan issue. And Adams is trying to walk the line. He wants to better relations with France, so he sends a 3-man diplomatic commission to France to try to normalize relations again. And what kind of reception do they get?
Not a pleasing one.
No. In fact, they were not officially received at all.
At all.
The French Foreign Minister Talleyrand refused to receive them, instead demanded that they pay a huge bribe and give France a huge loan just as a precondition to talks.
So, huge insult. I mean, this is a bitch slap to the face of John Adams, and he is pissed.
When he finds out about this, he is outraged. He begins preparing for war. At first, he refused to show the diplomatic dispatches to the Republicans, and they accused him of exaggerating as an excuse for war. So Hamilton and other Federalists put pressure on Adams to release the diplomatic dispatches. When he does, he substitutes the letters X, Y, and Z for the names of the 3 French representatives who extorted the bribe, and that's how this becomes known as the XYZ affair.
Yeah, and the American people weren't too thrilled about these revelations either. The prevailing slogan of the day was, "Millions for defense, not a penny for tribute."
The American people are pissed
Yes.
at France.
They are not happy.
We're not taking this kind of treatment.
So, what's this going to lead us into? Are we going to war?
That's what it looks like.
But
It ends up being known to history.
Is it just going to be a smidgen of a war? Just a hint, just a touch of war.
It's known as the Quasi-War.
Ah, the Quasi-War.
It ended up being an undeclared war. The only fighting was at sea. U.S. ships and privateers would attack French trading ships in the Caribbean. France would attack and harass American trading ships. So there was no... That's all the actual fighting was. It didn't actually erupt into fighting on land, but there was great fear that there would be, and that France would invade the United States.
And we didn't have much of an army or a navy to speak of.
No.
At all.
We've only got a few thousand guys in the army, and they're all on the western frontier.
And that's not going to cut the butter.
No, it's not. So, and this is also another partisan domestic policy issue, because the Republican Party is very much against having an army, thinking that it is a tool for oppression.
That's right.
And wanting to rely instead on militias. But now it looks like France might be going to invade, so Congress... It actually authorizes 3 new armies. 2.5 of them only ever would exist on paper.
Pretty wild stuff.
The new army.
This is the new army.
12,000 men. Only about half of them ever actually got enlisted. The Congress also authorized the Provisional Army, which was 10,000 more men that would be called up if there was a declaration of war.
And kind of you got some guys on standby.
Yep.
They're on deck.
And then you've got the Eventual Army, which would be 50,000 men that would be called up in the event of an invasion. That army's really just existing on paper.
Yeah. Now, I just want to say, in my opinion, I don't think John Adams came up with the names for these. The guy that came up with the different regal options for what to call Washington didn't come up with the new army, the Provisional Army, and the Eventual Army. I think that somebody else came up with that. I don't think it was John Adams.
Probably came out of the Congressional Committee.
Yeah, that would be my guess.
But these armies created a lot of trouble for John Adams, because one of the first things he does is nominates George Washington to be the commanding general, but he really didn't ask George Washington first if he wanted to do it.
Old, retired, and Adams was like, "Hey, remember when I nominated him before? How good that was? Let's do it again. Let's roll with it."
Yeah,
and Washington's like,
"We're going to war. We need George Washington's name on this, right?" But Adams has a problem, because George Washington is nominated and confirmed without giving consent, and it turns out he has some conditions that he wants to attach to his willingness to serve.
What would George Washington desire in order to serve?
Well, first off, he's not going to actually take the field himself unless war actually starts.
That only makes sense.
And also, he wants to name his own subordinate generals. He wants to pick second and third in command.
Uh-oh.
The problem is, the guy he wants to name as second in command is Alexander Hamilton.
Dun, dun, dun. So that wasn't going to work.
Adams hates him. Hamilton was only a colonel in the Revolutionary War, so he's going to be promoted to general above the heads of more senior generals who are not going to be happy about this. But this is what Washington is demanding, and Adams is like boxed into a corner here where he has to go along with what Washington says because he can't repudiate George Washington.
But this is where you gotta give a little bit of credit to Adams. He stands up for himself. He doesn't buckle. He's not going to give in.
He pushes back and he tries to change the order of the ranks to keep Hamilton out of being second in command, but Washington sticks by his guns. Hamilton's cronies in the cabinet are pushing for it real hard, so Hamilton ends up getting named second in command, which with Washington not taking the field prior to an actual war puts Hamilton in charge of the army.
So that seems almost like the president is being dictated to.
Yeah, that's what Adams said, but that's kind of the price he has to pay when he needs to rely on George Washington. He has to do what George Washington says.
Otherwise, could we have a war?
Well,
again, we're back to, can we do this without Washington?
Yeah, it'd be a pretty messed up war if George Washington wasn't on board with it. But John Adams wasn't just going to sit down and take this lightly. Once this army gets appointed with Hamilton at the head of it, John Adams doesn't like how any of this stuff went down, so he basically sabotages the army by dragging his feet. All those armies that existed only on paper, he made them do a lot of paperwork on paper armies that never really existed and dragged his feet on people actually getting recruited. And then he really cut the ankles off of the army by sending a new diplomat to France to make peace and eliminate the whole purpose of the army.
So, in a sense, what Adams did ended up working. He went with this, was not pleased at the result, and so kind of was able to bide time and, try and hold off to see if we couldn't get peace.
Yeah, he ended up making peace against the inclinations of a lot of his own party, and he sent a diplomat to France without consulting his cabinet at all and against the advice of his cabinet, and it ended up making peace and resulting in the dissolution of these armies so that
pretty rogue move.
Hamilton didn't get to do anything with them.
So, yeah, I would give credit to Adams for that. That was a pretty rogue maneuver. And, I think he had the circumstances before him and handled it in a way that really benefits him.
Yeah, he really...
However, there's something not so beneficial to him that occurred prior to this piece being concluded, and that is the Alien and Sedition Acts. What are those, Jim?
Well, they're kind of born out of the war hysteria where the whole nation is afraid France is going to invade, and because of the sharp party divisions in the United States, where the Republican Party was seen as very having favoritism for France, a lot of Federalists were afraid that if France invaded, that Republicans would side with France against the Federalist U.S. government.
Uh-oh.
And this was the fear that led to the Alien and Sedition Acts. The Alien Acts were 3 laws that made it more difficult for immigrants to become citizens. They allowed the president to deport aliens that were considered dangerous and would have authorized the president to round up and imprison French aliens if war was declared.
Wow.
I don't think the Alien Acts really got much, if any, enforcement.
No, I think it just sounded more extreme than it played out.
Yeah.
But
there was a threat that was there.
There was a palpable threat.
But then there was also the Sedition Act, which made it a crime to publish scandalous and malicious writings against the government of the United States, the Congress, or the President, with intent to defame or bring them into contempt or disrepute, or to excite against them the hatred of the good people of the United States.
So, basically, if you write or say if you talk any shit about the President, about the government, you're in deep shit. You're in trouble.
Could be a federal crime.
So, yeah, this is a big deal. A lot of people are really willing to lambaste Adams for this because they basically said, like, oh, well, he was thin-skinned and he couldn't take criticism, so he basically threatens anybody that criticizes him with federal crime, jail time, fines, serious stuff.
Yeah, it seems... pretty
that's
direct violation of the First Amendment.
Right.
But this was born not so much out of John Adams' thin skin as much as it was a war hysteria, that there's a fear that the government is going to be subverted by a foreign enemy. That was the kind of spirit that produced it, but that wasn't really all the way that it was enforced. It was enforced in some more petty ways.
Right.
Matthew Lyon was a member of the House from Vermont. He was prosecuted and imprisoned under the Sedition Act. He published that John Adams had an unbounded thirst for ridiculous pomp, foolish adulation, and selfish avarice.
Ouch.
And he called Adams a bully, and he called the Senate stupid.
Oof.
And that got him prosecuted under the Sedition Act, but he ran for re-election from prison and won.
Damn.
There was also the scandal-mongering journalist James T. Callender. He got imprisoned for an anti-federalist pamphlet in which he called Adams.
One of my favorite. This is one of the just sickest burns in history. Like, my God, to have this said about you.
He was called, quote, Adams is a hideous, hermaphroditical character which has neither the force and firmness of a man nor the gentleness and sensibility of a woman.
My goodness.
They straight up called him a hermaphrodite.
Yeah. That's savage.
Yeah.
That's savage. And, so, there were some problems here.
Yeah,
You had a lot of people getting imprisoned and getting into deep shit. And that wouldn't be corrected until a little bit down the road.
Yeah, these prosecutions were very unpopular, and they led to the increasing popularity of the Republican Party that opposed them vociferously.
Yeah, and of course, Jefferson would go on to pardon a lot of the guys that...
Yeah, the Alien and Sedition Acts expired after 2 years, so they kind of expired on their own at the end of the Adams presidency, and Jefferson ended up pardoning everyone. Although,
they wouldn't go away, though.
Side note for Jefferson, who was a very vocal opponent against the Sedition Acts, when he was president, he did secretly encourage the prosecution of some Federalist journalists under state libel laws.
Hypocrite.
So even though he was the Anti-Sedition Act champion, he still kind of got his own shots in there as president.
Well, I guess you'll have that. But yeah, this kind of thing wouldn't go away. I mean, it's still a problem.
Yeah,
in a sense, but back in Woodrow Wilson's day.
Yeah, in World War I, Woodrow Wilson passed the Sedition Act of 1918, which was a very similar war hysteria-related measure from World War I. And the Japanese internment policy of World War II is what the Alien Act was contemplating for French immigrants had war broken out.
Yep. Yeah, pretty dark shit.
So between these things and the fracturing of the Federalist Party between Adams and Hamilton, Adams is facing a difficult re-election campaign.
Yeah, it's not looking too great in 1800, and it's going to bring us to one of the dirtiest, low-down campaigns. Well, I would have said that, but times change.
Yeah.
It was
dirty for the time.
It was a dirty campaign.
Adams, in his last year in office, he's like really broken with Hamilton and is trying to pivot towards the center, firing Hamilton's cabinet, making peace with France, trying to appeal to moderates. But it's kind of too little too late.
Yeah. It's just, yeah, there was just different things that, and I think the way that they were able to kind of use his character against him, just his overall, like, the way he bore himself.
Yeah.
They were able to use it against him, you know.
Yeah, there was, during the run-up to the presidential campaign, Hamilton published a pamphlet just destroying Adams. Hamilton decided that he didn't want Adams to be president. His view was, if there's going to be a president that we don't like, let it be someone of the opposite party so that we're not responsible for him. So he almost didn't care that Adams was going to lose. And he published a pamphlet that drew on a bunch of inside information that the cabinet fed to Hamilton so that Hamilton could lambaste Adams in the public eye and paint him as being pretty kind of unstable.
Yeah, they made him out to be like
office.
A boorish, temperamental, cold, prudish, calculating, wannabe monarch.
Hamilton wrote that Adams displayed the unfortunate foibles of a vanity without bounds and a jealousy capable of discoloring every object.
That's harsh. But like that, Hamilton, he didn't realize it at the time, but he was helping to unwind his own party.
Yeah, that sounds like a very high-minded principle that, let's not have a bad president of our own party so that we're not responsible for him.
Yeah.
But also, this was basically the end of the Federalist Party.
Yeah, he undermined his own background.
This election was the last time Federalists ever got even close to the presidency or national prominence.
They never had another chance. And had he lived long enough, I imagine that would have been a sense... It probably was anyway, but it would have been a sense of deeper regret, probably.
Yeah.
Because, Federalist policies would have kept Alexander Hamilton right towards the top of power.
Yeah. But by the time Hamilton's pamphlet came out, the writing was already kind of on the wall for this election because Aaron Burr had organized the campaign for New York State Legislative Assembly.
That's a whole nother story in and of itself.
Yeah, we'll get more into that story maybe during the Jefferson episode because Aaron Burr's role in this election has far-reaching consequences.
It sure does.
But at the time, most states had their electors for electoral college were named by the state legislature. So when Aaron Burr organized a Republican victory in New York State legislature, it gave those big swing state votes to Jefferson this time, and that kind of earned Aaron Burr his spot as the running mate on the ticket, and New York put Jefferson and Burr ticket over the top and spelled the end for John Adams' re-election.
That was it. And we'll talk a little bit more about the end results of the election in the next episode.
Yeah.
But as for John Adams, it seemed like he was done. Was he just going to hang his head in defeat and mope?
Nope.
No. Not John Adams. He wasn't done yet.
John Adams John Adams and his fellow Federalists, because the Federalists lost not only the presidency, but both houses of Congress. They are on their way out. But in the lame duck session, they passed the Judiciary Act, expanding the federal judiciary, appointing a bunch of new Federalist judges at the last minute, days before they went out of office, the so-called midnight appointments.
One huge result from this was a man that was going to be in charge of one branch of government for the next 34 years? 34?
That's right.
Yeah. Mr. John Marshall.
Adams appointed him Chief Justice of the Supreme Court at the last minute, and Marshall would go on to transform the Supreme Court into a powerful branch of government. Before this time, the Supreme Court had had the practice of each justice would write separate opinions. Marshall ended that and had one justice write for the majority of the court, so the court would speak with one voice and really begin asserting itself. In the case of Marbury versus Madison, Marshall asserted the court's power to declare acts of Congress unconstitutional and established the court's right to be the final arbiter of the Constitution's meaning. In Mccullough versus Maryland, Marshall upheld the constitutionality of the Bank of the United States and established the doctrine of implied powers, which finally resolved in the Federalists' favor an argument over the scope of the Constitution that started between Hamilton and Madison during the Washington administration.
So a really, really important appointment. But that is, you can't understate it. Again, I'm going to use that. You can't understate the importance of this appointment. John Marshall was an incredibly important appointment. Yeah. Now, as for the rest of them, Jefferson pretty much removed most of them, replaced them.
Yeah, a lot of the new judgeships were replaced.
So that didn't really...
But Marshall was there. The election of 1800 began, decades of total Republican domination of the presidency and Congress, but the Federalists hung on in the judiciary, and Marshall was the Federalist voice that kept Federalist power alive. Despite
so that was the
destroy it.
That was huge. He was able to get that to stand. Jefferson was pretty quick to replace a lot of the appointees from the midnight appointments, but John Marshall, though, that's one that stood the test.
So John Adams spent his last days as president doing this, and then he slunk out of the Capitol in the night, did not go to Jefferson's inauguration.
Yeah, he took off. He dipped. Peaced out. He hit the dusty trail. Didn't stick around. He didn't care. He didn't want to see.
You guys are done with me. I'm done with you.
That's it. So that and the last minute, the midnight appointments, that has led to a lot of history remembering John Adams as being, stubborn and angry. And he was bitter over not winning the election, so he would do anything he could to screw with the new administration.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I guess that's only partly true.
Yep.
They hadn't got along in a while. The election
Adams
of 1800
Jefferson
was really dirty.
Yeah,
and they really insulted each other quite a bit. Not them personally, but their mouthpieces.
Yeah.
I mean, and they really put a friendship on the precipice. And there was a period there where they didn't want anything to do with each other.
Yeah, it got really nasty.
It was bad. And let's harken back to a great woman. It took Abigail Adams to kind of get those two to reconcile later on down the road.
Yeah, Jefferson's daughter died while he was in office, and Abigail Adams sent him a letter of condolence that kind of reopened the friendship.
Yep.
And then it ended up being Benjamin Rush, their mutual friend, who encouraged Adams to write to Jefferson, and they ended up reopening a correspondence that they continued for the rest of their lives.
So, Adams is out. He's not the president anymore. What's he gonna do? He snuck out of Washington. He's dipped. He's gone back home. How's he gonna spend his time? Because he had a pretty long retirement.
Yeah, he had the longest post-presidency up until recently when Jimmy Carter surpassed him. He spent most of his time reading books, studying the classics, and defending his legacy. He believed, in his own time, he sees that he's in a historic time period, but he thinks, man, when all is said and done, it's going to be George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, who people remember, and not me.
Yeah.
And he's pissed about that. So he writes an autobiography. He writes a lot of stuff for the newspapers to record his history and protect his reputation and legacy.
And to a certain extent, he did have a little sense of fulfillment, because when he was 89 years old, he saw his son, John Quincy, be elected to the presidency. Well, we'll talk about that later, but yeah, John Quincy Adams was elected to the presidency.
Yeah, John Adams, he was the only one of the first 5 presidents who had a son, and his son became president.
Yeah.
So there was the fear at the time against hereditary rule. We're kind of lucky that Washington, Jefferson, Madison, Monroe didn't have any sons.
Right.
So that hereditary succession wasn't really an option.
It wasn't
because
an option.
the one time that we almost had that option, we got John Quincy Adams, although he had certainly distinguished himself through merit.
Yeah, of course we'll get to that in episode 6.
John Quincy Adams wasn't riding to the presidency on his father's reputation.
No, certainly not.
He did that on his own.
Yeah, he had his own reputation.
Within a year of JQA becoming president, his father, John Adams, reaches the age of 90, which made him the longest-lived president until recently, when Reagan and then some other more recent presidents surpassed him. But for a while, he was the oldest. He died on July 4th, 1826.
The same day as Thomas Jefferson, and 50 years to the day after the Declaration of Independence. Now,
Pretty spooky.
if that isn't some kind of spooky coincidence of history, I don't know what is.
Yeah. I think Adams' last words were, "Thomas Jefferson still lives."
That's right, yeah, but
that
he didn't realize that
was false, because Jefferson had died earlier that day.
Yeah, Jefferson had died several hours earlier, and obviously news didn't spread. He couldn't tweet.
Yeah.
You know, Sally Hemings couldn't tweet, "Oh, Thomas Jefferson's dead."
Yeah, one of the benefits of slow communication is that Adams didn't have to be told about Jefferson's death as the last thing he had that happen to him.
Right. And so passed another founding father and another great man, John Adams, who is the Rodney Dangerfield of presidents. He doesn't get no respect.
Not much. We give him some respect in this episode. I hope
We sure tried.
You'll look at John Adams in a little bit different light.
And hopefully a better, more understandable light. He was a guy that did his best.
Yep. We were at his house, and we will talk about that when we come back after a word from our sponsors. Word from our sponsor, Dr. Church's Antispasmodic Elixir. Fits cured. Convulsion, hysteric, epileptic, all kinds of fits are effectively cured by Dr. Church's Antispasmodic Elixir. The virtues of this medicine are absolutely unparalleled. The most dreadful fits ever known have been entirely cured by it.
Wow.
We even have a testimonial affidavit from one James Pocock, who says, under oath, "I was grievously afflicted with fits for upwards of 15 years, and that to so violent a degree as to require 12 men to hold me and prevent me dashing myself to pieces.
My God.
They would generally last me 5, 6, and often 7 hours, in consequence of which my constitution became quite emaciated. I made application to many eminent gentlemen who afforded me no relief whatsoever until I applied to Dr. James Church, who prescribed his antispasmodic elixir, which alone cured me of these most dreadful fits and restored me to perfect health."
Amazing.
You heard the man. It really works. Go out and get Dr. Church's antispasmodic elixir today.
I might have to get some of that for myself. Oh boy, I could use some antispasmodic elixir. But that's going to bring us to our next sponsor, which is Dr. James Church again.
He's back.
If you thought he was just the antispasmodic elixir guy, think again.
This next one is just for the ladies.
Ladies, do you suffer from pimples, blotches, ringworms, freckles, sunburns, shingles, or prickly heat rash? All of these conditions are effectually and speedily cured by the application of Dr. Church's genuine vegetable lotion. That's right. Dr. Church has administered it for several years with the greatest success and is confident that it is unrivaled by any other lotion or cosmetic. You get a half pint for $1. A pint is just $1.50. What a deal! Ladies, now that the antispasmodic elixir has made your hysteric fits a thing of the past, you can have the clear and perfect skin to complete the new you with Dr. Church's genuine vegetable lotion. Thank you, Dr. Church, very much.
Now a message from our sponsor, William Allen. Whereas Lydia, my wife, has left my bed and board for reasons unknown to me, this notice is therefore to forbid all persons harboring or trusting her on my account, as I will not pay any debt of her contracting from this date. Listeners, we don't know why Lydia Allen has left her husband. He doesn't even know. But just be sure not to lend her any money expecting him to pay it back. That's a message from our sponsor, William Allen.
Update. Breaking news. Moments after our ad on William Allen's wife Lydia aired, he contacted our show and bought another ad.
Now this is very exciting.
I am excited.
Yeah, let's roll right into it. William Allen says to us here, quote, whereas Lydia, my wife, has returned to my bed and board, I therefore will pay all debts of her contracting from the date hereof as formerly. Lydia Allen has come home, ladies and gentlemen.
Wow.
She and William are back together, and our listeners should feel free to trust her on his account once more. What a happy ending for these two lovebirds, right here on the Dead Presidents podcast, and a little bit of proof that we can help get some things done.
We're making a difference.
Making a difference on the Dead Presidents podcast. And now, back to the show. And we're back. Now we're going to bring the episode to a close. We're going to try and provide you with a summation of John Adams as a man. And we're going to give you our final thoughts. But before we get into that, as we mentioned in the previous episode, we've been to many a presidential home. We actually figured it out, and we've been to 20 different presidential homes. Now, 2 of these were in the same place, and that's the one we're about to talk about. We went to Quincy, formerly Braintree, Massachusetts, after a night of partying at MIT and Harvard bars.
Yeah.
An excursion into Harvard Square that we can't talk about on this podcast. And
I'm not afraid of the authorities of Harvard University. We were thrown out of Harvard bars at 2:00 in the morning. They were closed.
Yeah.
But we weren't done. We wanted to continue
exacted vengeance by
partying in the classic Harvard tradition inaugurated in the Adamses' time. And
yeah, so the great tree in the middle of Harvard Yard there, we took a piss on it.
We christened a Harvard Yard tree with our urine.
Yeah, just took a piss.
In the classical tradition.
That's it. So that happened. And then we couldn't find a place to stay, so we
slept in our car in a
stayed in
hotel
our car in a
parking
parking lot. And that was after running around avoiding the police who seemed to be out for us. And the one hotel we couldn't stay in because that cop was just sitting there.
Yeah.
And then we
well,
succeeded.
we sure showed them. And
yeah,
we
we
made
showed
it.
them, and we succeeded, and we were able to go to the magnificent.
John Adams' homestead at Peacefield.
That's right.
We received our own private tour. Being
Yeah,
the first
this was literally
people
my
there
favorite.
in the morning.
This was my favorite tour. I mean, I'd probably say my favorite house, but I don't know. It was definitely my favorite tour, and there was aspects of it that blew my mind. Like, every other president home we've gone to, there's been at least a couple people in the tour.
Mm.
You know, like Mount Vernon, there was, what, a dozen of us? 16? Something like that? I can't remember.
Yeah.
You know, maybe more than 16. Maybe it was 18 people going through in a group or whatever. At Peacefield, it was literally you and I got a exclusive guided tour through the house because we got there early, and the dude was like, all right, come on in. And it was just so awesome an experience to get just a personal tour that we were able to go through and ask anything we wanted. And the moment that my brain exploded, and I'm sure yours did similar, was when we went into the Adams Library, which is basically its own fucking building.
Yeah, their library is a separate building made of brick and stone, separate from the main house, and made of stone so that it won't catch on fire, because they had a lot of books there.
An insane amount of books. It's just
2 stories.
It's literally, yeah. It's
all 4 walls.
Probably, it might even be. I couldn't even put a number to how many books. I mean, it's a huge amount, and you couldn't. I could spend the rest of my life in there and not thumb through everything in there.
Yeah, it was about the most impressive sight at any of the 20 presidents' houses we've been to.
Oh, I mean, it was more impressive than some libraries. Like, you know, obviously.
So if you're in the Boston area, don't forget to check out Peacefield.
Yeah, just absolutely fantastic. And, of course, John Quincy Adams lived there, too. And a short jaunt away, you could go and see the 2 original houses.
Yeah, the little, before they were rich and famous houses, I think the one that John Quincy was born in.
Yeah.
And that they lived in before they bought their nice mansion.
Yep, those are there to see. And not too far away is the church where they're buried.
That's right.
We couldn't get in. We tried. It was locked. We were there in spirit.
Yep.
They probably knew that we were going to try to pilfer at least one of the bodies.
Yep. But
so, you know,
who's
you
to
win,
say
you
we
win
didn't?
some, you lose some.
Who's to say we didn't?
Oh, yeah. Well, anywho, that's going to bring us to about the close of our second episode here, John Adams. And before we go, we want to bring up just some, for further interest, if you want to check out some things on John Adams, learn a little bit more, as though you could really learn too much outside of this podcast, what would you recommend, Jim?
Well, I'd recommend the David Mccullough biography of John Adams. Really an excellent biography that was very favorable to Adams and helped contribute to reviving his reputation. And I'll just put in a little plug here for audiobooks. Really long-ass history books can be intimidating sometimes, but if you go to your local library, sign up for a library card, you can get this audiobook and many others for free, and you can listen to them when you're not listening to the Dead Presidents podcast.
Sounds like a great deal. I would also say, if you're so dense that you can't even think about a book in any format, you could also check out HBO's John Adams with Paul Giamatti in the titular role, and that is fantastic. I mean, I'll say it straight up.
Yeah,
fantastic.
really
Laura
great
Linney,
show.
out of the park.
Definitive Abigail Adams' portrayal.
Yeah, just really, really super well done. I wish, like, honestly, after watching it, I was like, I wish every president could get this treatment. I would love miniseries of that nature on every president. That would be so fucking cool. So yeah, definitely check that out. It's well done, and it'll definitely make you appreciate John Adams if you're too lazy to actually read about him.
And let's leave the final words on John Adams to some of his friends and foes.
That sounds like a good idea. Quote, Mr. Adams has always appeared to me to an ardent love for the public good, and his further knowledge of the world seems to have corrected those jealousies which he is represented to have once been influenced by. Now, who must have said that? Surprise, none other than Alexander Hamilton in 1788.
This is before they had their falling out. Hamilton had some generous words for Adams.
Indeed he did. And on the other hand,
someone said of John Adams, he means well for his country, is always an honest man, often a wise one, but sometimes, and in some things, absolutely out of his senses. That was Ben Franklin.
Benjamin Franklin.
1783.
Well, you have some praise from an enemy, and you have some criticism from somebody on the same team.
John Adams, complicated guy, as you now well know, having just listened to this episode of the Dead Presidents Podcast.
That's right, and if this wasn't enough for you, we're going to close with another little song by that beautiful little band, the Constitutionalists. Here is John Adams. Thanks again for listening. We'll see you next time.
It is weakness rather than wickedness which renders men unfit to be trusted with unlimited power. The jaws of power are always open to devour, and her arm is always stretched out if possible to destroy the freedom of thinking, speaking, and writing. Ambition is the subtlest beast of the intellectual and moral fields. It is wonderfully adroit in concealing itself from its owner. No man who ever held the office of president would congratulate a friend on obtaining it. He'll make one man ungrateful and 100 his enemies for every office he can bestow. Liberty cannot be preserved without knowledge among the people. I would define liberty to be a power to do as we would be done by. Being the president was the 4 most miserable years of my life.